I'm Jen West, professional rebel of delight.
And I'm Dave Wiesdock, sage of creative scaffolding.
And this is shadow casting. Good morning, Dave. It is podcasting day, and I thought we would really get present. So sit in your present and tell me, how are you today?
I'm excited. You're giving me a present, you said.
Yep, here it is.
Oh, it's the present moment you shouldn't have.
It's wonderful. It's the best gift I can give you.
It is. What other gift would I need besides the present moment?
Exactly. And specifically, what I would like to talk about is people always talk about awareness and mindfulness. And for the majority, even myself as I went along, they were the same thing. You're aware, you're mindful. There's no difference. It's just pick a word, 6 to 1, half dozen the other.
Yeah.
And I want to dive in. And specifically, 2 things came up this week that really made me want to look at this. One was tactical nutrition. It's on Instagram, and they put up a reel talking about self-awareness. And in it, they talked about how people say they're very self-aware. And they're like, yeah, I know I'm this type of person. It's just who I am. And then they talked about that step 1. What are you going to do about it? And then they go into mindfulness. And then the other one was talking about being too self-aware. And if you're overly self-aware, then it can be bad for you. And so that's what I want to dive into today, is really getting into the nuts and bolts of what these mean, how we can use it, and how we can use it with some skill so that it makes us happier and better, not judgmental. How do you feel about that?
Oh, this sounds like an amazing podcast for us to run through. I am excited to talk about the difference between awareness and mindfulness. This was also something for me that definitely was a synonym before we really began digging into the nuances. And I think there's a lot of benefit to be gained from our audience by even just understanding there's a difference. And then over time, as you begin to develop and understand that awareness, coming back to this podcast and cultivating these 2 concepts, these 2 qualities, is what's going to really create change for a lot of people. So I'm excited to talk about this today.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we always just take words, throw them around. So let's dig into the meat. I'm going to give a generalized definition of how I use these 2, and then we can build on them and kind of get into the nuts and bolts, down into the weeds, and, do our shadowy thing.
Oh, you didn't tell me we were gardening today.
We are totally gardening, and we are getting rid of all the weeds and making some flowers, maybe some veggies. Anyway, with awareness, just generally, not necessarily self-awareness, but overall awareness, I take that to mean being open and gaining clarity on the moment you're in. So right now, what's happening? What do I see? What am I aware of? And it's really a sinking into life and gathering insights. And then for mindfulness is doing something with that awareness. It's taking the insights you gain from being open and taking in the world and bringing about a choice to it. And hopefully you're bringing about a choice that makes you feel better about life, or grows you in some way, or makes you more joyful. Have a goal.
Right. When I think of awareness and mindfulness, I go back to some of my original spiritual, philosophical, religious teachings where they were kind of used almost interchangeably. And what really changed it for me was the awareness aspect. Mindfulness has kind of stayed the same as far as it being more of a action-oriented quality that I developed. Mindfulness is, I gained this awareness, so now I'm going to catch when this awareness comes up. And then mindfulness is the act of developing a different quality around that awareness. Awareness was what really changed for me, because there's so many ways awareness is used, whether it's self-awareness, social awareness, situational awareness. Awareness can be outside of you, awareness can be inside of you. And so the underlying thread I feel for all of these things is listening. Like you said, it's this ability to listen, but not be so intently focused on what you're listening on that you miss kind of the message. It's kind of like when you're listening to a song on your AirPods or your headphones. If you play it too low, you're not going to hear the song. And if you play it too loud, the noise is going to be so distracting that you're not going to catch what the music is. So you need kind of that sweet spot of volume. And there's this balance that comes with awareness of just being able to listen and not project what you think you're going to be listening to or for. But we'll kind of get into that as we go. For now, awareness isn't passive either, is where I was going with this. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to sit and listen. There is this receptive quality to it, but it's an active reception. You are being aware, you are listening, and you are absorbing and allowing that information to come to you. And so it's this really nuanced act of being able to be receptive and also actively being present while you're receiving that information.
It's almost a paradox because you're not changing, you're not judging, but you have to be there. Autopilot doesn't work. You miss everything in autopilot. And so awareness is really getting into life. And that takes a lot.
Yeah.
It gets all of your senses engaged. You start to feel your body. You start to notice other people and what they're doing. And the problem is once you start to notice, you make judgments.
Mm-hmm.
And neither mindfulness nor awareness really has judgment. It has discernment. And we can go into an entire discussion on those two. But generally, judgment is this is right, that's wrong. This is good, that's bad. And the discernment is more, is that what I want? Is that useful?
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't mean in other cases it's not useful, just in this case, not so useful. So if you notice people's faces and they look down and you take that as something you did, maybe not useful. Maybe curiosity would be a better decision. And that would be mindfulness. Oh, I noticed something. I'm feeling something from that. Do I make the judgment call or do I get curious and ask a question?
Right. It's this ability to have a different space and interaction with your awareness and your mindfulness. And what's coming to mind for me as you're talking about this too is this sense that one builds the other. You're not going to just have perfect awareness when you even understanding the nuanced differences between these definitions. There's a practice here. There's a consistent effort that needs to be applied so that you can build these skills, because what ends up happening for me, at least as I started learning these things, is I was making judgments thinking I was discerning. And by coming from a space of I'm trying to be aware and I'm trying to be mindful, it allowed me to recognize when those judgments were coming up. Again, almost kind of this metacognition of being aware of my awareness and my decisions, and then allowing myself to switch gears and step into mindfulness space. That mindfulness is where I feel that discernment starts to develop. It's not really from the awareness, it's from the mindfulness. The mindfulness builds discernment. And then as you build discernment, it builds your mindfulness. So it kind of feeds itself that way. What I would really love to dig into, I feel, is more of this awareness, because again, it's for me between the two definitions, this is really where there's a lot more nuance and maybe not so popular a definition as what's in the mainstream out there right now.
Yeah, jump on in and load us up with new insights so that people can use it better. Because I really feel that it gets lost and it becomes more self-destructive than empowering.
Yeah. Yeah. So you shared an article with me about awareness, kind of awareness in action. And there were some examples in there of dovetailing off this idea of discernment and judgment. There was this idea in there about negative self-awareness or bad self-awareness. And I thought it'd be really cool if you wanted to kind of talk about that. And then maybe we can, as you were saying, go back and forth, talk about some examples and go from there.
I can definitely do that. Yeah. So I got this article sent to me, and its title was Clickbait Wonderland. And it said, I think it was too much self awareness, or if you're overly self aware. I don't remember exactly the title of it, but I was like,
Too self-aware. Yep.
yeah, too self aware. I'm like, how can you be too self aware? And really, what it was looking at was this awareness that had a lot of judgment around it. So it was looking at other people and saying to ourselves, why am I doing this wrong? How am I doing this wrong? How do I become perfect in all scenarios? And a lot of it catered outward to the world around. So this person, how do I make a judgment so that this person feels okay? How do I change myself so that I come across and I don't really create any friction or conflict, And so that was a big part of it, was this outward looking self-awareness, which felt really weird for me to have self-awareness be outward looking. Other pieces of it were this perfectionism. I need to do everything right in every sense. Not allowed to have emotions, judgments about emotions, lots of comparison. All of these things came up. And for myself, it felt like a lack of self-awareness because everything was on the negative. And here's the point I want to make on this one. Before you start a practice of awareness, especially self-awareness, what is your goal? What are you cultivating? Because it isn't picking ourselves apart and making ourselves perfect for the world. It's growing ourselves in the way that we want to be. If I'm working on self-awareness, maybe I'll pick one theme, like kindness. And then I need to define that. How am I being kind? What does kindness look like for me? Is kindness always making the other person feel good? No, not for me. That's being nice, like saying what they want to hear, making sure their feelings aren't hurt. No, kindness is being truthful and not in the bluntest way that just hurts people's feelings. It's bringing it with compassion and respect. And so that's what I might cultivate. I'll be looking inward to my interactions. Was that kind? Was I resentful in that moment? How do I process myself so I'm kinder? Am I kind to myself? That's number one. I mean, if I can't be nice to me, how am I going to be nice to others?
Right. What I want to underscore as you're talking, from my perspective, is this internal versus external self-awareness. And it really, to me, goes back to what you were saying. It comes back to the goal, because I feel like a lot of people start their spiritual journey for mixed goals, mixed messages, mixed intentions. Not always are people self-driven to spirituality. Usually there's this external motivator, factor, situation that pushed someone to go out looking for something, whether it's a bad situation at home, bad situation at work, this existential question that they want answered that they're getting pushed to. And so there's this drive almost to develop awareness so that you can handle something outside yourself. And at least as a shadow casting podcast, I think, or I feel where Jen is going with this and where we really want to underscore this is that it isn't that having awareness about others outside of yourself isn't part of the package. But if you, as a shadow caster, going way back to our first podcast, if you are someone who is casting a shadow, you have a responsibility to yourself and to those around you to know how and what kind of shadow you're casting. And that requires that internal self-awareness. And if you look at the work from law of attraction to Joe Dispenza, there is this underlying current that awareness of self is what facilitates and propagates your life around you. So, in other words, the more aware you are of how you interact with the world, the more control and choice you have in your life. And the more serendipitous things come. Some people call that God or source or whatever. But it's really this ability to step into this new awareness, to bring yourself into a space that isn't filled with judgment, resentments, projections, conjectures. It's this ability to really, truly listen. And that is so hard. And also, I'm realizing how hard this is to communicate on a podcast where we are doing the antithesis of that, which is just talking. But it is really this ability to just sit and listen, want to engage with this awareness in a new way. It's this openness and curiosity. I was working with a friend of ours, and he was coming from the space of judgment with his awareness about being good or evil or right or wrong. And when we tore apart kind of the judgments and went more into the awareness of just what he was feeling when a certain situation was coming up and not judging it as good or bad, it allowed him to have different options available of what he could choose. Because as soon as he stepped out of this judgment sphere of, well, if I go this route, then I'm a good person. If I go this route, I'm a bad person. And he removed those labels and just said, okay, I can do option A or B. But wait a minute, now that I'm out of good and bad, there's this option of C, D, and E. All of a sudden, the mindfulness now comes in. Now he can make different choices. And like I told him, and we will tell our audience, that's the practice in and of itself. That's why you have a mindfulness practice. It's the practice of going, I have a different choice and I'm going to choose that. Some people do that in a meditation setting. I feel the goal is to be able to go out and do that in your real life. That's why it's a practice. You are practicing for going out and doing it on game time. And game time is when you're out in real life in these difficult situations. That's what you're building the practice for. Those are the tools that you need to come then bring into the arena.
Yeah, very stoic. If you listen to Ryan Holiday, he's almost always talking about this. And when those hard situations come up, this is something I've started using a lot. It's when everything's going wrong or things aren't working. In my head, I immediately think to myself, this is what I trained for. All those tools I've been putting into practice, all the meditation, all the being kind when it's easy, that was training for this hard moment. And if I'm not using those tools, then what's the point? Why am I doing it? If you only practice to practice and it doesn't go out onto the field, there's no point.
Yeah, it's just like a soccer game, for example. You're working as a team passing the ball, hopefully. And if you're not, your coach is giving you practice drills during practice. Here's how to pass the ball better. Here's how to be more aware of when to pass the ball, being aware of your opponents, being aware of your teammates, being aware of yourself. There's a lot of awareness involved in that. And so the practice helps build the skills so that way you're working more on muscle memory. However, the difference is that this muscle memory is based in the space of awareness. We have old programs, old tapes playing that aren't building awareness. And so it's changing the tape. It's actively lifting up your tape player, pulling out the old cassette, making me sound really old now, and putting in a new one and playing that tape. But here's the tricky thing. Our monkey mind doesn't always remember that we changed the tape. And when it finds a tape that it's not used to hearing, it will very slyly go pull out the new tape, put back in the old one and say, no, I'm listening to this tape. You know, if they're in that 3-year-old temper tantrum, it kind of becomes fun. It's like, okay, I caught it. Now I'm going to put back in the new tape that I want. Now I'm going to put back in the new tape I want. And 10 minutes later, now I'm going to put back in the new tape that I want. It's a constant choice. And that's what mindfulness does. It gives us the ability to step into that constant choice.
Okay, Grandpa.
I know, but you can't change the cassette tape on your Spotify. So I don't know what the Spotify equivalent of is.
I know. I was trying to think of something more modern. I don't know, using a different computer that doesn't have your algorithm all in it. That's the only thing.
Maybe it's like a playlist now. You have the playlist of songs you like, and you're like, oh, I don't like that song anymore. I've outgrown that song. Maybe you take that song out, or maybe you make a whole new playlist. Is that what you're doing?
I've got one. So you're on Instagram or YouTube, and you have all of these normal stuff that comes into your feed because it's what you like and it's what you see. But you start putting in new videos that you watch. You haven't liked them, you're not following them, but you start watching them. And then those slowly start filtering into your feed and taking over. And that's kind of what happens. It takes a while. You still get the old stuff coming up. And the more you watch the other one, the more it comes into your feed and takes over everything.
Where did you get that example from, I wonder, Jen? I did that exact thing, just so the audience knows. That's what I did. That's how I built my new awareness. And now when Jen shares new clips of someone that I'm not following, I'm instantly following them.
Yeah. Well, and it happens to me all the time. I mean, my YouTube feed was very much movement and psychology and Carl Jung. And then somebody had me watch a D&D game, and it was like 10 hours long. And then now I get all these D&D feeds and NPC jokes. And then Dave introduced me to Has Been Hotel. And now all I get are Alistair reels all over the place. Yeah, it starts to filter in and starts to take over. And the more you pay attention to it, the more you get it. So if you want to make change, consider it like your YouTube channel. It just slowly filters out the old that you pay less attention to.
Exactly. I love that. So let's dig into the negative aspects then, I guess, of self-awareness, since that's kind of what we've talked about, why self-awareness is really good to have and what mindsets you can have to develop self-awareness. So if going back to that radio dial analogy or that volume dial, there can be times where you turn it up too much, where you go into the judgment, where you go into these kind of overly self-aware, as that article was talking about. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of explore that, and maybe there were some bits and pieces in it. One quote that really jumped out at me was kind of that first part there where he says, or she, I actually don't know who the author is.
He, I think, Mark something or other.
Perfect. So he says, first off, it can lead to feelings of isolation. People who are excessively self-aware tend to isolate themselves from others. They often spend most of their time alone, thinking about themselves. Oh boy.
That's definitely a bad use of self-awareness. I mean, this makes me think of Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
And the subjected, introverted side, where everything's inside your head, it's the way you've come up with it, versus extroverted, with is dealing with the world around you. And if you're only living in the subjective of you, you're going to make up all kinds of stuff. You can't believe your thoughts. You just can't. You have to go out and see what actually happens. There must be an interaction.
I thought you were going to go a different way with the analogy. So now I'm going to borrow your analogy and go a different way with it. It's also like MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator, because once you figure out your MBTI, once you've gained that awareness of a little bit more of how you cognitively function, a lot of people like to go the exact opposite way with the awareness. They do go into that overly, quote unquote, overly self-aware, because it's not really self-awareness what people end up doing. What I did when I first learned my MBTI, I didn't go research the cognitive functions. I didn't try to go understand what the difference was between an SE and an SI, or a TE and a TI. I went to the internet. I went to Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and I found all the videos about you. If you're a type 1, these things might resonate with you. If you're an ENTJ, these things might resonate with you. And there were these like comedic videos, because once you find out who your MBTI is, I feel like there's this innate need to go find your tribe. You're like, oh my God, I now know a piece of myself. Let me go find others who are like this. Are they like me? Did I find someone like me? Because finding connection is important. I mean, shadow casting is all about connection and interaction. It's all about these pieces moving together and how they shape our lives. And celebrating our humanity is all about humanity as a whole, right? Celebrating these connections and these moments that we have together. And so what happens though is we over identify then with our MBTI, for example. And so, and I say we as in I did this myself, we over identify with it. And then we start using that as an excuse. We go, I'm an ENTJ. I'm very non emotional. So therefore, don't expect any emotion from me. And you almost start to double down on all these things you just gained self awareness about. So instead of going, I've gained self awareness, and as we're going to talk about, then I develop mindfulness around it and create more choice, you begin to limit your choice. You go more into limitation. You go, this is who I am, therefore I am this. And you draw your line in the sand, and it seems so, when you begin to develop awareness and mindfulness, it seems so arbitrary in hindsight, but it makes total sense in the beginning because you are looking for that tribe. You're looking for that connection. You have developed awareness, and you're like, if I go find other people who are like this, they have other awarenesses about this type, but that's going inside yourself. And that's where, if I'm really getting nitpicky and semantic, that's where I feel that overly self-awareness starts to bite you in the butt. It's when you're going outside internal self-awareness, because this isn't overly internally self-aware. It's overly externally self-aware. You are overly aware of everyone else and everyone else's behaviors and patterns, and you begin to ignore yourself more. That's why you've got to shift. There's this balance, this paradox. You have to develop awareness and understanding internally, and then go out and find others that are like you so that you can begin to create context around that, begin to create understanding and choice and options.
Like the awareness of Myers-Briggs, it's a beautiful thing when you realize your type and it comes out. I am not alone. There are other people who think the way I think. There are other people who struggle with the things that I struggle with. And yeah, that can turn you inside where you're judging all those things. I'm an ISFP. And so I used to go to, I just can't organize stuff. I'm a P. I'm all out. I'm free spirit. I do not organize my time. And it's an excuse. That's not how that works. It's harder. And it's an awareness, but there are ways to use the other functions to help you be incredibly organized in the moment. So you look like you're a big, huge planner, but you just do it in the moment. But I digress.
No, and I was going to say, this goes back to what you were saying earlier about intent. When I first found my MBTI, I just caught it as we were sharing this story. My intent was very obviously and clearly to find others like me, to not feel so alone with my type. That's kind of presumptuous, I guess, to assume that others are going through that same intent, but this is where the awareness comes in. What is your intent? When you figure something out or when you gain a piece of information, what are you doing with that information? That's the bigger question. That's where the real meat of the awareness comes in for me, because Mark in this article goes on to say that you can feel isolated, that you can move into guilt and shame and worthlessness. I mean, oh my gosh. I don't think I ever felt guilt for being an ENTJ or shame. I mean, I might have judged characteristics of it like, oh, ENTJs aren't emotional. But that's not self-awareness then. I've turned self-awareness off the minute I'm in judgment. And that's where I think where I was going with this earlier with the friend I was sharing about is that I was trying to get them to see that you can't hold space for judgment and awareness at the same time. I don't think they can coexist in the same sphere, because if you're in judgment, you're projecting, you're labeling, you're trying to structure certain awareness into a box to understand it. If you're in awareness, you're receptive, like we talked about. You are open, you're listening. If I'm listening, I can't judge, because listening isn't judging. Listening is just receiving. You are just getting information. And so what I feel really happens, and where Mark is really getting at with this, is that once we gain awareness, we are not really great at learning how to handle it, whether from social, cultural, familial, upbringing, however you want to look at it. We have just as humanity have not done a great job of learning how to handle awareness. And so where I keep building up to is mindfulness, I feel, is that tool. It is that is why it is seen as a synonym, and we are creating distinction. because those that haven't really worked with their awareness and instead default to the awareness of others haven't really cultivated true awareness. And so that is isolating because you're isolating from yourself. You're not using it as a tool to understand yourself. And it's isolating because even if you find a tribe with ENTJs, you're still isolating from all the other 15 types. So no matter how you look at it, that awareness is creating isolation. Whereas, or I'm sorry, that over awareness. Whereas if you're in awareness and listening and receptive, once I stepped into that, I joined all sorts of different MBTI groups. It was just all for awareness gathering. How do they interact? How do they behave? What type of posts are they making? Instead of it going, oh, that was an INFJ making that post, I'm just looking at the post. You start to create a different relationship with the awareness.
Yeah. And since we are playing with Myers-Briggs, learning your type gives you a framework, and then you decide how you want to grow it. You have a tool now that says, okay, I'm disorganized, but here's my type. How do I use that type to make it work in my world so that I am organized in a way that allows me to live my life better instead of one making it an excuse or feeling really bad. And that's not self awareness. That's where it gets very isolating. Things can go the wrong way, making up stories in our heads for how things go. So here's how we put them together. I'm going to call on George Gurdjieff, who created the fourth way. And it's a psychological training that he went out, and it's very spiritual. And the fourth way is taking mind, body, and spirit and cultivating them all at the same time. So that's just a highlight. But Gurdjieff had two tools that he would use with people. One was self-reflection, which is exactly what you think it is. Something happens in your life, and then later you go back and think about it. How could I have done that differently? How can I do better next time? Do I like the way I interacted? It's reflecting back on something that happened. And then the other tool he has, which is a gazillion times harder and really requires a ton of awareness in the moment, is self-remembering. And it's called self-remembering because you are remembering you are here now. You are in your body. You are noticing your heart rate, or when your body lights up with energy because something happened. You recognize a thought as it comes up, and you're not the thought. And self-remembering is hard, but that's what awareness is. And in self-remembering, if you've done both self-remembering and self-reflection, you could be in the moment when that emotion comes up. Your brain can trigger because you've reflected on it before and say, I don't want to act the same way. I want to try something new. And in that moment, you can do it. But that takes a lot of cultivation. And then you have to be aware again to just see how it plays out, not that it's good or bad. And at first, it's self-reflection getting closer and closer in time so that you're noticing sooner. So maybe you get angry, and the first time you don't really notice you're angry until 2 hours later, or you're just in it, you're anger. And then it's 1 hour, and then it's 30 minutes. And then pretty soon you catch as your anger starts to build. It's not even anger, it's the edge of frustration. That's when change really starts to happen. And so that's what mindfulness and awareness give us. It shortens that time. It gives us the ability to respond to our world instead of react to our world. And it's a process, and it takes time, and you got to change your YouTube video all up. So
Yeah. And there's something else I want to bring up as we're kind of solidifying this as a whole now. I feel like there is an undertone of judgment as you and I
always.
are talking. And what I want to bring up is that as you are learning to build awareness, there will be inevitably times where you quote unquote fail, where things don't work, where you have changed the tape, let's say, for depression, where it's this constant tape of, the world is out to get me. I have no energy. I'm always tired. All the things that come up with depression, because for everyone, it can always be a little different. And that's all on one tape. And so you decide to take the tape out and you put in a different one, right? And so maybe it's practicing gratitude. Maybe it's going on a walk every day. Maybe it's talking to your friends a few times a week. Maybe it's going out and getting a new hobby, whatever that tape is. And then 2 days later, the tape changes back and it's back to that depression tape. What I'm trying to get at is that it is not wrong. You are not bad. You are not wrong for having that depression tape replay or start playing again. That is the process. That is why it is a practice. That is why in shadow casting we talk about play and sincerity, because it's hard work, and being hard on ourselves is not a necessary part of growing. It just makes it more difficult. So I'd encourage and invite the audience to look at this development as a play, as a practice, as something that you're going to mess up a lot, and just be okay with that. And we as a shadow casting, as a podcast, like we are here, like we encourage you guys to comment and share because we want to know your experiences and because it creates a community and an opportunity for you to see how others are growing and sharing and learning in their awareness. Because not everyone is going to develop awareness the same because we are all unique, we are all individual. And sometimes getting new insights on how to develop awareness and mindfulness opens it up in our lives for us. It just sometimes takes that one sentence, that one thought, that one new idea, and suddenly your world opens up. And so that's why we encourage everyone to share and to comment on our podcast because it creates awareness.
Yeah. Celebrate your humanity, people. Celebrate with us because we enjoy this. And if you're struggling with the failure, go back and listen to our failure podcast.
Yeah. And go back and listen to the play podcast. Go back and listen to the original podcast on shadow casting. These are a lot of great tools to help you develop your awareness. And just know that if you are struggling with this, there's tools available to you.
Yeah. And where you are is perfectly fine. You're exactly where you need to be. So just be okay with it and then move from there. And I think we'll stop this one. We threw so much content at you. Comment and say, please break down this one part. Because there was a lot and it was an overview.
Yeah. So as always, make sure to comment, build that awareness, build that community. Make sure to like our podcast wherever you're listening to. Make sure you hit that share button, share it with a friend maybe that you can build your own awareness community with, or maybe share it with someone that you do talk about building awareness with or building a mindfulness practice around. Talk about what maybe you would disagree with what we shared, and we'd love to know that too. So as always, just make sure to engage with this content because we want to create this to help you build the best life possible for you who's ever listening. So help us make that for you. And as always, until next time.
See ya.